Sandra, you asked me to let you hear your voice on the talking picture.
But Hitch, you mustn't do that.
Why not?
Well, because I can speak well.
Do you realize the squad van will be here any moment?
No, really. Oh, my God, I'm terribly frightened.
Why? Have you been a bad woman or something?
Well, not just bad, but...
But you slept with men.
Oh, no!
You have not. Come here. Stand in your place. Otherwise, it will not come out right, as the girl said to the soldier. That's enough.
On Tuesday the 29th of April 1980, Sir Alfred Joseph Hitchcock passed away in his Bel Air home, aged 80. Widely regarded as one of the most influential filmmakers in the history of cinema, his beginnings were of modest and working class roots. The youngest of 3 children, brother William and sister Ellen, both 9 and 7 years his senior respectively, Alfred was born on the 13th of August 1899. In the flat above his parents' leased greengrocer's shop in Leytonstone on the outskirts of East London. A well-behaved young boy, he had been brought up with the fear of authority instilled in him by his father, having one time sent the 5-year-old Alfred to the local police station with note in hand. The policeman had read the note and locked up a terrified Alfred in a cell for some time, freeing him with the warning, "That is what we do to naughty boys." Alfred would in later years recount this story, adding that a fear of authority and the law still remain within him. Being of Irish Catholic heritage, Alfred, now aged 7, was sent to convent school and later enrolled aged 11 in a Jesuit grammar school with a reputation for brutal discipline. He said of his time being tutored under the Jesuits that they taught him organisation, control and to some degree analysis. Critical skills that would serve him well later in life. Aged 13, Alfred left the Jesuit school, enrolling in night classes at the London County Council School of Engineering and Navigation in Poplar, with the ambition of qualifying as an engineer. Tragically, in December 1914, his father, aged just 52, succumbed to emphysema and kidney disease, passing away, leaving Alfred, now aged 15, to support himself and his mother. His older siblings having already flown the family nest, Hitchcock took a job as a technical clerk at the Henley Telegraph and Cable Company, but continued with his night classes, but now opting to study art history, economics, political science, drawing and painting. His siblings also assisted supporting his mother, with his brother running the family shops. Having already developed a taste for British, German and French films, and especially American films due to their superior production techniques, he had started to read the film industry trade journals from the age of 16. I would read not the fan magazines, but the American trade journals to follow the real news of new productions and the new filmmakers whose work excited me. Alfred had been too young to join the army when the First World War broke out, but on reaching his 18th birthday in 1917, he joined the Cadet Regiment of the Royal Engineers and took part in theoretical briefings, weekend drills and exercises, avoiding conscription on the grounds of a medical deferment due to obesity, and also because of his employment with the company contributing to the war effort. In 1919, he became a founding editor of the Henley Cable Company's in-house publication, the Henley Telegraph, for which he also contributed several short stories. During this period, he was promoted to the advertising department, where he wrote copy and drew graphics for electric cable advertisements, and Alfred recognised later in life that this was a tangible first step towards cinema. He began to read more widely in fiction, but favouring more and more on the detective tales of Catholic novelist G.K. Chesterton, whose sleuth, Father Brown, was delighting thousands of readers. He also discovered author John Buchan, whose successful novel, The 39 Steps, he would later turn into one of his best and well-known British films. At that same age, he was also exploring the works of Edgar Allan Poe, whom he later credited with influencing his own work. Very likely it was because I was so taken with the Poe stories that I later made suspense films. I can't help comparing what I've tried to put in my films with what Edgar Allan Poe put in his novels. And in 1919, Alfred read in a trade paper that the production arm of Paramount Pictures, named Famous Players Lasky Films, was opening a studio in Islington, London. So, in a shrewd move that epitomised Alfred's hawk-like recognition of opportunity, he found out what film they were planning, Sorrows of Satan, which was eventually cancelled. He read the book, and with the paid help of Henley's advertising manager, produced a portfolio of some drawings for the title cards based on the book, and took his work to the new Islington studios. They were impressed, and they went on to hire him on a part-time basis, and in 1919 he began working for Islington Studios London as a title card designer. Hitchcock continued to work for the Henley Telegraph and Cable Company whilst also producing title designs and graphics for Lasky Films every few days, which he produced on his own time. After the success of their first two London-based productions, Lasky Films offered Alfred a full-time role, which he took up, resigning his position at Henley's. In the next 2 years, he created graphics and title cards for all the production company's films whilst also taking on other overlapping duties in the minimally staffed studios. The hours were long, and Hitchcock was frequently the first to arrive and the last to leave. "I'm American trained. All of the personnel at the studio were American, and as soon as you entered the studio doors, you were in an American atmosphere." Hitchcock claimed he was not ambitious, but his intense devotion to a modest job and his insistence on learning everything there was to learn about film belies this claim. He was always ready with helpful suggestions and enthusiasm, and an alacrity in the event a studio executive or director ran into issues or required additional assistance. During Alfred's time at Lasky Films, he worked with a French director called George Fitzmaurice, who was to have a profound effect on Hitchcock's working practices and methods and his later work as director himself. Picking up on Fitzmaurice's working techniques, Alfred learnt the value of script development, character analysis, meticulous and detailed storyboarding of each shot, lighting techniques, and supervising set preparation and design. And it wasn't only the technical aspect of film production direction that Alfred learnt from Fitzmaurice. He also learned about the quiet, professional approach to the chaotic, undisciplined atmosphere of a film set. Fitzmaurice obtained his results from his cast and crew by being calm, slightly detached, quietly insistent, and so well prepared for virtually every alternative suggestion someone could offer, he had a reply ready. Hitchcock was not only witness firsthand, but he was also able to discuss and analyse these techniques in details with Fitzmaurice in a social setting. In 1923, Hugh Quarr, director of the in-production project at Lasky Film Studios, Always Tell Your Wife, was removed from the production due to irreconcilable differences with the producer, actor, writer Seymour Hicks. Hicks, years later, in an interview said that, "I was at my wit's end to know what to do, being on the verge of throwing the whole thing up. A fat youth in charge of the property room at the studios volunteered to help me. It seemed a forlorn hope, but as I liked the boy, and as he seemed tremendously enthusiastic and anxious to try his hand at producing, we carried on as co-directors, and the picture was finished." Alfred Hitchcock now had his co-directorial debut under his belt. Quite soon thereafter, Alfred was assigned by the studios a comedy to direct, but due to financial difficulties in the studios, the production was shelved. The studios were now preparing to close down operations due to superior product competition from the continent and America. Alfred Hitchcock explained in an interview years later, "They started to close down the studio gradually and began exporting people to America. Directors like John Robertson, George Fitzmaurice, Donald Crisp, big players like Ann Q. Neilson, James Kirkwood, Evelyn Brent, Norman Kerry. But the rest of us who stayed around in London were temporarily unemployed. The empty studio became a rental studio, and one hung around for the jobs. Eventually a group of independents came in." An alliance of businessmen had formed a partnership with the purpose of making commercial feature films. Michael Balcon, Victor Saville, and John Friedman forged ahead with their first joint production of a successful play, Woman to Woman. Michael Balcon had hired Alfred as assistant director to Graham Cutts, and when the production needed additional assistance, Hitchcock volunteered and set to work on the script and the art direction. Balcon and Cutts were impressed that Alfred's talent matched his ambition. The finished film was a commercial hit, and buoyed by the success of the production, work on the next project, The White Shadow, commenced. Advertising for The White Shadow expounded on the virtue that the film had an identical talent pool as their previous production, Woman to Woman, with the hopeful expectation of a similar success. Those expectations were dashed as the film bombed and proved to be a total failure. The partnership was now in jeopardy and eventually dissolved after their third film, The Prude's Fall. During the latter productions, director Graham Cutts pondered the crew being used and had become critical of Hitchcock. He complained to Michael Balcon that Hitchcock, the assistant director, was maybe spreading himself too ambitiously around the production by writing scripts and title cards, designing the sets, preparing the cast and supervising the costume and props. But Alfred had Michael Balcon's full confidence, with Balcon arguing that Hitch was cheerful, capable and serious, and that he was saving them a not inconsiderable sum of money. Balcon later said his interest in Hitchcock was because of his passion for films and his eagerness to learn. He had no background in the entertainment world at all. His family owned a group of London fish shops, but apparently he never wanted anything but to work in films, and I'm sure if he never actually swept the floor at Islington, he would have been ready and willing to do so. He was a clever draftsman, and he wrote and designed the subtitles, which were so important to silent films. In January 1924, Lasky Films made it official. After having been renting out studio time for over a year, Islington Studios was up for sale. Balcon eyed up the prospect of owning rather than renting the studios with interest and entered negotiations, eventually purchasing the studios for £14,000 rather than the asking price of £100,000. Going on to produce films at the newly acquired Islington premises under the company name of Gainsborough Pictures, their first production in 1924, The Passionate Adventure, was the fourth Cutts Hitchcock film, with Alfred as assistant director. It was on the production of Prude's Fall, later in 1924, that things would prove more than eventful. With Cutts as director, Alfred and the rest of the crew accompanied him for location scouting and filming on the continent. However, as Hitchcock later remarked in an interview, Cutts' girlfriend, an Estonian that he'd picked up en route, interfered to such an extent that not a single frame of film was shot. The hectic private life of Cutts continued to impact the production on their return to England, and the crew were unclear how Graham Cutts would be able to fulfil his contractual obligations. However, Alfred had come back with ideas to assist Balcon, planning the film in such a way that it could be made entirely at their Islington studios. And that wasn't all that Alfred came back with. He came back with a fiancée. His fiancée was Miss Alma Lucy Reville, who worked at the Islington studios as freelance editor and continuity technician. The couple had first met in 1921 when Alfred, still a part-time employee at Lasky Productions, introduced himself in a calm, unruffled manner, which struck Alma as unusual in the hectic and chaotic atmosphere in which they worked. Alma was puzzled when on subsequent encounters Hitchcock failed to acknowledge her presence or initiate a conversation, even when they were assigned the same film with Alfred as part-time graphics and title card designer. It was only when Michael Balcon had promoted Hitchcock as assistant director to Cutts that Alfred called Alma to offer her a position as cutter on Woman to Woman. Later, he admitted to her that he had behaved in the manner in which he had because he was very shy when it came to women. His attitude, however, remained businesslike and professional. He would state later that he had watched her frequently without her knowledge, explaining, "It was unthinkable for a British man to admit that a woman has a more important job than his, and I waited until I had a higher position, assistant director." They worked together on several Balcon Cutts films, and Hitchcock proposed aboard a ship crossing from Germany to England after the unsuccessful production location scout for The Prude's Fall. In Alfred's words, "The day I proposed to Alma, she was lying in an upper bunk of a ship's cabin. The ship was floundering in a most desperate way, and so was Alma, who was seasick. We were returning to London from Germany, Alma was my employee. I couldn't risk being flowery for fear that in her wretched state she would think I was discussing a movie script. As it was, she groaned, nodded her head and burped. It was one of my greatest scenes. A little weak on dialogue perhaps, but beautifully staged and not overplayed. In 1924, engaged, they travelled to the continent for an Anglo-German production of The Blackguard, filmed on the outskirts of Berlin in Neubabelsberg. In, at that time, the world's foremost film production studios, Universum Film Aktiengesellschaft. German cinema had a global reputation for its distinctive visual style that British and American directors would strive to replicate, using Germanic styles of lighting and editing, unusual angles and dark angular shadows that evoked an eerie, unsettling and menacing apprehension, techniques that were to influence Hitchcock's later storytelling. The following year, back in England, with The Blackguard in post-production, Hitchcock attended a meeting of the Film Society, attended by industry professionals, discussing the most important element in a film's production: stars, publicists, producers, distributors, or critics. We make a film succeed. The name of the director should be associated in the public's mind with a quality product. Actors come, actors go, but the name of the director should stay clearly in the mind of the audience, stated Hitchcock. And it was an approach he adopted, a visible presence in his own films, as if watermarking his own work, and going on to publicise his work with focused showmanship, a dry, menacing, humorous rapport with the public. Alfred was about to embark on his first official solo directorial debut. I never volunteered to direct. I was a victim of studio politics. Graham Cutts didn't like me and complained to Balcon, and Balcon came to me and said, "How would you like to direct a picture yourself?" It had never occurred to me. Michael Balcon's account was somewhat different to that of Hitchcock's. He wanted to be a director, but it was not easy for me to get a young man launched in so an important job. Balcon was dependent on film distributors for production finance, and they in turn were resistant to new and untried talent, preferring to use established names within the industry. Using an assistant director to direct a new production appeared to them as an unnecessary risk. So, Balcon opted to use his German connections. He sent Hitchcock, along with a crew, which would include Alfred's fiancée as assistant director, back to the continent. Alfred's first official production as director, The Pleasure Garden, was underway.